Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Doctora.
Yes, good morning. Um, we have to start on time because our guests are very busy and they have commitments after this. So I'm Dr. Monica Montecillo, an infectious diseases consultant at QualiMed Santa Rosa. It is my great pleasure to moderate today's lecture series on COVID-19 vaccines, what clinicians should know. So let me give some house rules first. Number one, please make sure your microphone is on mute. Two, kindly type questions on the type or chat box. They will be answered at the end of our speakers' lectures. And lastly, use headsets or earphones for better audio quality to limit background noises. So before we commence, let me call the President and CEO of QualiMed Health Network, Dr. Edwin Mercado.
Thank you, Monica. So we're very fortunate today to have very distinguished guest lecturers. Of course, we have our very own Dr. Eric Domingo, our current Undersecretary of Health and Director General of Food and Drug Administration, and of course, Dr. KARL Ivan HENSON, Clinical Associate Professor of the UP College of Medicine. So very short update is we're currently involved in the IATF initiative for the vaccination procurement. There are three work streams under the IATF. We have the supply chain or the procurement work stream, the administration and the allocation work stream, of which myself and Dr. Regina Nazareth is part of, and of course the communication work stream. So it's very crucial that we understand how the DOH choose, or in particular the Dr. Domingo and the FDA vet all the vaccine candidates and how they apply for emergency use authorization. And it's very important also to understand the timeline that we're looking at. Currently, also there are initiatives to procure the vaccines through various manufacturers or sources. So I'm looking forward to a very detailed discussion, and I will not take up the precious time of Dr. Domingo and Dr. Henson. And thank you very much to the Gina again of PSQ and Dr. Regina Nazareth for again putting up this lecture series, and of course Dr. Monica Montecillo for coordinating or for emceeing this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Edwin. So again, today we are privileged to have with us big names in the medical field. We always see them on the television and on social media. The voices of these medical practitioners are listened to and are treasured. So let me introduce our first speaker. He graduated Doctor of Medicine from the University of the Philippines, Manila. He is an ophthalmologist who took his fellowship training on ophthalmic pathology and oncology, Instituto de Oftalmobiológica Aplicada of the University of Valladolid in Spain. He is a professor of the University of the Philippines, Manila, a former director of the Philippine General Hospital, a former city councilor of Pampanga. He is also a recent Undersecretary of Health for Health Regulation Team of the Department of Health, and is the current Director General of the Food and Drug Administration. I'll also introduce the next speaker. So our first speaker is Dr. Rolando Enrique Domingo. Our next speaker took his Doctor of Medicine from the University of Santo Tomas. He graduated cum laude. He's an internal medicine specialist who took fellowship in infectious diseases from the University of the Philippines, Philippine General Hospital, and Wayne State University, Detroit Medical Center. He's currently taking Masters in Public Health, University of London, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Is a clinical associate professor at the University of the Philippines, Manila. He is the training officer of the Infectious Diseases Fellowship Program of the Medical City, where he is also the director of the Hospital Infection and Control and Epidemiology Center, Medical City, and the chair of the Antimicrobial Stewardship Committee, the Medical City. So our second speaker is Dr. KARL Evans HENSON. Let me now call our first speaker, Dr. Eric Domingo.
Thank you, Monica. Nice to see you again.
Yes.
Hi. Parang nagkikita-kita naman tayo lagi sa kahit na Zoom, no? Sila Carl and Gina, ang masipag at makulit na tiga QualiMed. And of course, Dr. Edwin Mercado. I'm happy to see all of you, especially yung pamilya ko dyan sa QualiMed Manila dati. No? Let me share my screen, and I would just like to give you everybody a rundown on how we give approval to vaccines, the COVID-19 vaccines in particular, that we will be using in the country in the next few months. Mukhang mabilis na eh. Mukhang next month, mayroon na tayong bakuna probably, no, to begin with health workers, which is all of us here, no, na nandito ngayon. So, this is most of you have seen this picture already. This is the vaccine development process from the discovery side, dun sa gray, sa left side, hanggang umabot tayo sa approval. Usually yan, it takes maybe 5 to 7 years. No? So may preclinical research, phase 1, phase 2, and then after you complete your phase 3 trials, which is usually after maybe 2 years, and you have all of the data, sufficient data, you can now register with the FDA for product registration. So dito nag-a-apply ng CPR, and if it is approved, then you get what we call a CPR or a marketing authorization, meaning maaari nang ibenta sa merkado, no, yung ating gamot. However, during this time of pandemic, yung mga vaccine developers natin nandito pa lamang sa kalagitnaan ng phase 3. So we're in the middle of phase 3, and with these interim results, we are now making decisions if we are going to use these vaccines or not. So you can imagine that there are still a lot of things that we need to learn about these vaccines. There are things that we know, pero talagang hindi pa tapos yung kanyang development process. So ang EUA vaccine is not a licensed vaccine. No? This is a vaccine that is under development that we use during the emergency. So ito yung normal na process ng approval ng FDA for vaccines. So dati yan 6 months to 1 year. Itong sa kaliwa, dadaanan mo lahat yan, isasabit mo lahat yan. But for the EUA, we have trimmed this down to about a 21-day process, especially if the vaccine candidate already has EUA approvals in what we call stringent regulatory authorities, or yung mga reliable regulatory authorities. And we have minimum requirements na, no? So safety and efficacy, and of course quality of the drug. Now, bakit tayo nagkaroon ng EUA? Before this pandemic, the FDA has always been working under Republic Act 9711. Ito yung batas ng FDA na pinakabago. And it always parang presupposes that we are always in regular times, na walang nagmamadali, na lahat ay kailangan makumpleto muna lahat ng clinical studies, tapos magre-register siya. So ibig sabihin, kung hihintayin natin, no, na magkaroon ng fully developed vaccine before they get registered, and then they register, and then they sell it here, that will take 2 to 3 years. Sa 2023 pa tayo magbabakuna. So wala tayong paraan na magrehistro noon. So that's why we asked the President to come up, no, to sign an order. And he did sign Executive Order number 121 on December 1. This grants the authority to the Director General of the FDA to issue what we call an emergency use authorization. An emergency use authorization is a process that we use so that we will be allowed to use and dispense drugs that are still unlicensed or unregistered in response to an emergency situation. So yung EO 121 din naman, very particular, talagang very specific, only to COVID-19 drugs and vaccines. It was signed by the President December 1, and on December 14, the FDA came up with the guidelines and the list of requirements for EUA application, and we started accepting applications for EUA. So the EUA will only be valid, no? This is according to the law, no? When all of the following circumstances are present. So dapat 3 out of 3. Number 1, based on the data that we have to date, it must be reasonable to believe that the vaccine may be effective to prevent the COVID-19. So kailangan maganda naman yung efficacy niya. Makikita natin na pag ginamit natin siya, makaka-stop siya ng infection. No? It will prevent COVID-19. Second, the potential benefits, the known and potential benefits of the drug or the vaccine when we use it must outweigh the potential known and potential risks. Kaya known and potential kasi since maiksi pa lang yung ating follow-up ng mga nasa clinical trial phase 3 natin, meron na tayong mga alam na possible adverse events. No? But of course, there are potential risks that we do not know yet because the actual observation will last until 2 years after the injections have been given to the trial participants. So meron tayong known, meron potential. So pag tinimbang mo, dapat mas mabigat naman yung potential benefits over the known and potential risks. No? So pag meron talagang very strong safety issues, hindi yan papasa sa atin. But if the safety issues that are found are mild and madali naman gamutin, pwedeng pumasa yan. And third, there must be no approved or available vaccine. So once meron ng approved, no? So halimbawa, one of these front runners, makomplete na yung trial niya and they have enough data to apply for a certificate of product registration or marketing authorization, then ma-phase out na unti-unti yung mga EUA na yan. Kasi meron na talagang approved drug. Who can apply for an EUA? Well, the industry can apply for an EUA, meaning the pharmaceutical manufacturer, pwedeng din yung kanyang distributor dito, yung kanyang local company dito, or yung kanyang importer. No? Or pwede rin yung public health program implementer. Pwede rin siya ang mag-apply for an EUA. For example, there's a vaccine developed overseas, tas wala siyang local partner, ayaw niya makipag-business locally, pero gusto siya i-procure ng DOH or ng National Task Force, then they can apply for the EUA for that product. Although these are still under development, no? Like yung sa US FDA, ang ni-require lamang dapat kalahati ng trial participants may 2 months follow-up na. Nag-apply na ng EUA ang Pfizer after that, no? 2 months follow-up of the total, half of the total trial participants. So even if the vaccine is still under development, hindi mawawala yung requirement for good manufacturing practice. No? The quality must be there. We will not allow a vaccine to come here without no certification of good manufacturing practice. And kailangan mangangako yung manufacturer that they will complete the development of the drug or the vaccine. So hindi pwede na sa kalagitnaan, gagamitin natin siya ng EUA, tapos yung developer sabi niya, okay, natapos na kami, hindi na namin itutuloy yan. They have to complete all the trials, they have to complete it, and register the product until the end. No? Kasi doon natin makikita talaga yung complete profile ng produkto na na-inject na natin. So in evaluating the applications, the FDA has the power to implement reliance and recognition. No? Ang ibig sabihin nito, kung may EUA siya from stringent regulatory authorities like US FDA, UK, Singapore, Japan, Korea, ganyan, pwede nating basahin yung kanilang mga reports and we can give weight on that evaluation. No? We can rely on them. Yung recognition is actually for WHO. For products that have already been given an emergency use listing of the WHO, pwede nating i-recognize yun. No? Sabihin, okay, recognize na ng WHO to, listed na, pwede na rin yan dito sa Pilipinas. So we can accept, no, or at least put a lot of weight on regulatory decisions of the WHO, US FDA, and other recognized authorities. And then, when we get the application, hinahati ko yun into 2. No? My office receives all of it, and then we pre-screen everything to make sure all the requirements are complete. So I divide it into 2. One half would be the technical part, the quality part of the drug. No? Meron tayong mga regulatory officers sa FDA who are now dedicated to COVID-19. So titingnan nila, yun bang in-apply na, kasi kailangan nila check din natin, yung bang in-apply ng Pfizer sa Amerika, it's exactly the same vaccine na in-apply dito. Is it the same factory? Meron bang certificate of GMP yan? Tapos yung kanya bang stable ba siya? Pag tinravel siya from Belgium or from US to here, do they have stability data? So they check the quality part. The safety and efficacy part, this is done by, the review is done by an expert, a panel of experts. So I have 2 panels of experts of at least 5 specialists each. No, merong mga allergologists, immunologists, infectious disease, vaccine development experts, and then they take a look at the safety and efficacy. And then these 2 panels then will make their recommendations and then give it to me for me to make a final decision and issue an EUA or deny the issuance of an EUA. The EUA is valid only within the duration of the declared public health emergency. So halimbawa, nawala na ang COVID pandemic, natanggalan, nilift na yung declaration of public health emergency, mafe-phase out na rin yung ating mga EUA. And of course, pag nagkaroon din ng CPR na, pwede na, matatanggal na rin yan. And the thing with the EUA is we can continuously revisit, review, revise, and revoke it at any time. So as we get more and more information, for example, Pfizer, dati wala namang nakalagay doon na allergy. Nung nag-injection sila ng 2 milyon na Amerikano, nakita nila na for every 100,000, a few people will have a severe allergic reaction. So now, kasama niya sa patient information sheet niya, product information sheet, that it has to be done. Vaccinations have to be done in an area where we are able to respond to people who will have severe allergic reactions. Or yung nangyari sa Norway, Sa Norway kasi, lahat ng tao, especially mga nasa nursing homes, including the terminally ill, pinagsasaksakan nila ng bakuna kasi 400 people were dying every week from the nursing homes. And then now they found that 23 died very close to the vaccination site, but it's because a lot of them were really old and really frail. So now kasama din sa indication natin the people probably who are above 85 years old and have a lot of systemic illnesses, you have to do a complete assessment before you decide to give the vaccine. So okay naman dito, hindi tayo nauna, meron pa tayong mga natututunan, And as it goes along, we will learn more about these vaccines. Since these are new vaccines, these are unregistered and vaccines under development, so yung pinapayagan natin siyang gamitin, pero at the same time, we are giving the DOH and FDA and the company the responsibility of doing very strict post-authorization monitoring. So we have to track the products, we have to make sure that everybody who is injected will be monitored for adverse events, and all of these have to be reported to the FDA so that we can see if there's any signal going on, if there's anything suspicious or anything severe, or if we have to talk to the FDA counterparts ng ibang countries through WHO to see kung meron tayong concern, baka kailangan itigil natin, pwede siyang itigil anytime ng FDA at saka ng DOH, or pwedeng mag-pause sa vaccination or decide to continue. By the way, sa Norway, they decided to continue. They did not change their strategy for vaccination, except a little more close the screening ng very, very elderly. So this is the status of the EUA applications now, Pfizer, BioNTech. Ito kasi talagang meron na siyang EUA sa US, UK, European Union, Canada, Switzerland, and these are all stringent regulatory authorities, and this is the only one with the WHO emergency use listing at this time. And they were the first also to apply, and we granted this already last week. So Pfizer now has an EUA and can be used in the Philippines. Si AstraZeneca nag-apply to sa amin after New Year na. It's undergoing review by our experts, and they were given some questions to answer. After the question and answer portion, sa pangako kasi ng AstraZeneca sa Friday pa sila, tomorrow, bibigay yung kanilang mga response. Then our experts will convene again and then make their final recommendation. So by next week siguro matatapos yan. Yung Gamaleya, si Sputnik, this is now under evaluation. They also submitted their requirements, and our experts are taking a look at them and will consolidate muna their questions to the proponent before natin pasagutin. Si Sinovac, yung pinakahuli, noong January 13 nag-apply, and yesterday actually completed their submission already and gave us their phase 3 interim phase 3 trial reports. So this one I forwarded to the experts yesterday, and they're going to take a look at that, and I'm going to meet them next week to see if we have any questions for the proponent before we make a decision. So in the horizon, we see a few more coming and asking us about EUA, Moderna, Serum Institute. Itong si Bharat Biotech mukhang nag-file na kaninang umaga dun sa Action Center ng FDA. So pinipre-screen na yan. And then we have Janssen, Clover, and Sinopharm. So these are the other possible vaccines that might be coming up soon. No? So just to give you an idea, 2 minutes, yung Pfizer na EUA. Ito yung laman, the salient points ng EUA ng Pfizer. Number one, siyempre ang sa statement natin, it has been found out that the application of Pfizer satisfies the conditions of the EUA. So na yun yung 1, 2, and 3 na sinabi natin kanina. It is clear that the EUA is not a marketing authorization or a certificate of product registration. Therefore, it cannot be used to market the vaccine commercially. Hindi siya maaaring ibenta commercially. Pfizer Philippines can only supply the vaccine to emergency response stakeholders, which means the DOH or the National Task Force or whoever the DOH or the National Task Force designate as part of the National Vaccination Program. Kaya po dyan meron kasama minsan mga LGU, public and private hospitals like the QualiMed Health Network and AC Health, I think are joining this as part of the private sector. No? Tapos yung mga local government unit, pero hindi sila pwedeng kanya-kanya bumili kasi otherwise mauubos ang bakuna, hindi natin mababakunahan yung ating mga priority groups. No? Hindi pwedeng unahan, hindi pwedeng kung sino yung may pera, siya yung unang makakabili. No? We have to still follow the National Vaccination Program. And Pfizer BioNTech is allowed for administration only in individuals 16 years or above. So wala pang vaccine for children and I don't think there's going to be one until maybe next year. Kasi ngayon pa lang nagsa-start ang mga trials involving children, no? Younger children. So yung cold chain management would be of course the responsibility of Pfizer and whoever procures from them, depende kung ano yung kontrata nila. No? And there must be a system of monitoring to ensure traceability of the vaccine and make sure na hindi na-break yung cold chain requirements niya. For pharmacovigilance, the company must have a comprehensive pharmacovigilance system or protocol, but this responsibility is equally shared by the government. No? So magbabantay siya, magre-report siya ng adverse events, pero tayo din hanggang sa level ng barangay. So pag sa hospitals natin, nagkaroon tayo ng vaccination, we also have to be part of that reporting system for adverse events. We will have to report to DOH and FDA and the adverse events. No? And if it's severe or suspicious, within 24 hours ang reporting niyan. Now, the responsibility of the stakeholders, we will be providing and we will be vaccinating, not tayo. We, the health workers, will be vaccinating them. So number one, those who will be vaccinated should be trained by the DOH in the vaccination program. Number two, we have to provide the fact sheets to recipients and caregivers. So, at saka sasabihin agad kung kailan yung second dose nila. No? Nire-reserve natin lagi yung second dose. Yung Pfizer, dahil sa US FDA siya may EUA, actually may Filipino version. Yung product information ito that you can download. It is necessary and mandatory to obtain written informed consent from the recipient prior to vaccination. And as vaccinators, we are required to report any adverse events following immunization. So the validity is within the duration of the declared public health emergency or upon issuance of a marketing authorization or CPR for that Pfizer vaccine, whichever comes first. So all the other vaccination EUAs will have the same, no? Will have the same tone and the same general conditions. So yun po ang this is the product that we'll be using. These will be the products that we will be vaccinating, and I hope you be guided accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eric, for refreshing us and reinforcing to us the process flow of vaccine approval. I guess this reassures the healthcare workers and in turn the public that the FDA is committed to ensure that vaccines that we will receive are of good quality and are well scrutinized. So for our colleagues, you may type your questions in the chat box and we will answer them after the lecture of our second speaker. So I am overjoyed to call one of my consultants during fellowship, Dr. KARL HENSON, for our second lecture.
Hello, everyone. Let me just set up my screen. Thanks, Doc Eric, for that talk. Let's see. Share my screen. All right. All right, can you see my screen? Okay. Sige. So I have been asked to step. Ay, wait lang. Stop share. Okay. All right. So I've been asked to give a talk on the basics of vaccine, para the clinical side. So see, Dr. Domingo talked about the regulatory aspect and how vaccines are chosen. But I think part of the way that people will gain or vaccines will gain more acceptance in even medical circles is for us to really know what the vaccines are about. I gave a version of this lecture to sa DOH Town Hall, no? And this slide deck, most of the slides were prepared by the Adult Immunization Committee of the PSMID, and you see the names there. The committee is chaired by Dr. Minette Rosario. So for this afternoon, I'm half parrot. All right, I have no disclosures for this talk. And this is my outline. I'd like to start talking about the basic concepts of immunization, and then we'll go a little bit into vaccine mechanisms of action. Tapos, evidence summary. We will just quickly go through what the trials have shown so far. All right, so let's go to the basics. So when a vaccine is given, I think I was told there will be some non-medical people here. So I'll try to make this as easy to understand as possible. So when a vaccine is given, so up here, no, it contains an antigen. An antigen is a piece of the virus or the bacteria. And it's supposed to elicit an immune response, or it's otherwise called an immunogen. So a vaccine is given sometimes with an adjuvant, and an adjuvant is designed or added to the product to stimulate further the immune system. So parang mas pinapalakas niya yung reaction or yung immune system reaction against the antigen. So once a vaccine or an antigen is given, cells that are within that area, macrophages or dendritic cells, they gobble up the antigens, and then they will internalize these antigens, and then they will start a chemical reaction. They will produce some receptors. No? So there are two kinds of receptors, MHC class 1 and class 2. Major histocompatibility type. No? And these receptors will trigger a cascade of events. No? So MHC class 1, for example, if it's activated, will start a reaction that will activate CD8 T cells. And CD8, they're very important for clearing infections. Okay, so for killing the cell, the bacteria or or containing the virus. No? CD4 T cells, this will eventually activate the B cells, and the B cells are the ones that will create the antibodies. Okay, so ito yung basically, to simplify it, it will memorize the features of the virus or the bacteria, so that when the body encounters the virus or bacteria again, the body will know how to react. So you can see that there are two pathways. No? So the first pathway is the CD4 T cell induced, eventually B cell activated pathway, and this is responsible for the prevention of infection. The second pathway is the CD8 activated pathway that has something to do with clearance and control of infection. So you can see that vaccines will trigger both, no? But predominantly, ang responsibility niya is in the prevention of infection by inducing antibodies. There are several other concepts that we need to know about. Immunogenicity is one of them. And immunogenicity is basically the ability of the vaccine to elicit a measurable immune response. So look at the panels on your right. This is what happens when you have a natural infection, meaning if you get sick with measles or chickenpox. Now, so you get exposed to the virus, and then the virus sort of triggers, so it's there in your system, and then it triggers a response from the T cells, and it also starts to produce antibodies. Now, your body starts to produce antibodies as a consequence of the exposure to the infectious agent, such that when you get exposed to the virus again in the second infection, you no longer will get the disease, no? Kasi meron ka ng protection. All right? Now, take a look at the panel below. With a vaccine, you expose the body to particles of the virus or bacteria such that you elicit the same immune response. You trigger T cells, and eventually you produce antibodies. So no disease in the first part, and then when you get exposed again to the second infection, when you get exposed again to the virus or bacteria, walang disease. So you prevent the occurrence of disease, and you also induce immunity against the disease in the future. So that's immunogenicity. The next concept is reactogenicity, and for one of the vaccines, for the BNT in Pfizer, this is important. So a reactogenicity is a subset of reactions occurring soon after receipt of a vaccine. So these are physical manifestations of the inflammatory response. So yung nakita natin na reaction pag yung kanina dun sa graph, the cartoon that I showed, once you give the vaccine, there's an inflammatory reaction. Ito yun. It can be systemic, meaning when you give the vaccine in the injection site, that injection site can be painful, it can be red, it can be swollen. No? So that's local symptoms. But you can also get systemic symptoms. Systemic symptoms such as headache and fever and fatigue, and it has something to do, again, with inflammatory factors, so cytokines and CRP and prostaglandins, etc. But both of them are manifestations of your body reacting to the antigen. So if it's not too bothersome, it's actually a good thing that you see manifestations of your body. You know that the vaccine is working. Sometimes, however, it becomes very bad. Sometimes with one of the vaccines, it can get very severe down. No? The third concept is acquired herd immunity. So we already know that when you get sick with measles or you get the measles vaccine, both will result in immunity. No? So dapat protected ka na after. So that's acquired immunity. And acquired immunity, whether by natural infection or by immunization, it will protect you when you get exposed again to the same pathogen. But a side effect of the acquired immunity is sometimes it will also prevent the spread of the disease to others. Okay, so pag hindi ka na magkaka-measles, hindi mo siya maipapasa sa ibang tao. So ganun din sa COVID yung iniisip. But however, what do we know about herd immunity, or how do we describe it? So herd immunity is the indirect protection from infection conferred to susceptible individuals when a sufficiently large proportion of immune individuals exist in a population. So let's illustrate using the panels on your right. So you see itong top three panels, for example. This is naive population. Ibig sabihin, you have a disease, for example, like COVID, no? None of us at the beginning of the pandemic, none of us have been exposed to it ever, so no one was immune. So you get a sick person coming into the community, and that person will easily, successfully spread the infection to, say, 4 other people. No? And then these 4 other people that get sick, when they get sick, they will then spread the infection successfully to 4 other people until more and more people in the community get sick. And while some of the earlier people who got sick now become immune, no? They recover. So yan yung nangyayari sa naive population. If you have a disease that's very deadly, like COVID, if you get sick, then you have a chance of dying. Okay? So yun yung problema. Now, if there is herd immunity, for example, in a community where a lot of the people already got sick, or a lot of the people already got immunization, like in the panels on the second layer, no? Itong 3 panels dito sa baba. So this community, marami nagkasakit or nabakunahan na sila. When a person who is infectious enters the community, may mga people na hindi na mahahawa. Okay? So, pwede siyang mag-successfully transmit to one person, but because there are more people na yellow, no, less yung chances that the infection gets passed around. Okay? As a result, these people in blue, in effect, na protektahan sila. So they were indirectly protected by the fact that there were a lot of people who were immune to the infection. Okay. Now, sorry, I deleted that slide. But the problem with herd immunity is dapat sabihin natin, if you depend on herd immunity or if you depend on a vaccine to result in herd immunity, the assumption is dapat when you get vaccinated, dapat walang forward transmission. Dapat kung mahawa ka, hindi mo na rin ipapasa sa iba. But as of this time, there's no study that shows that the vaccines do this. So achieving herd immunity, we're not yet sure about with the current vaccines. But this is something that we are hoping to achieve eventually. We're hoping that with further studies, the vaccines will show that it also prevents transmission. But we're not there yet. All right, so let's talk about some of the mechanisms of action of the vaccines now. I'm going to do a general discussion. So we talked about immunogens at the beginning of this lecture. We said that these are particles of the virus or even the whole virus that's injected into the person so that it induces an immune response. There are several types that are the most common. So virus vaccines, these are weakened or inactivated. Weakened meaning basically pinahina, attenuated, or inactivated, nilagyan ng substance such that patay yung virus, but it's still the intact virus that's injected into the person to induce an immune response. Protein-based vaccines, these are when you give pieces of protein in the vaccine, no? So protein na yung laman ng vaccine, and it's given to induce an immune response. That's the first kind of protein subunit or protein-based vaccine. The other kind of protein-based vaccine are the virus-like particles, where you have the entire virus without the genome. So basically, the shell of the virus is used to induce an immune response. Now, the two other kinds, and these are the mechanisms for the vaccines that we will talk about later on. The viral vector vaccines use a non-replicating virus. In this case, in the case of Gamaleya and Oxford, they use an inactive, non-replicating chimpanzee adenovirus. So this adenovirus, hindi siya, it's prevented from replicating. And then they insert a gene from the coronavirus, yung spike gene. So pag in-inject siya sa patients, the virus gets gobbled up by the cells, by the macrophages, and then eventually they will produce the spike proteins. So they will express the spike proteins from the coronavirus, and this will trigger an immune response. The DNA that's injected is not integrated into the DNA of the host, meaning it does get integrated into your DNA, but it does enter the nucleus. For nucleic acid vaccines, what happens here is you have the DNA or the RNA that's in a lipid coat, okay? So it's protected by a lipid coat, and then you inject the genetic material into your patient. The patient gobbles up the macrophages gobble up the particles, no? And then they start expressing the proteins by translating these RNAs or DNA. And then so that the macrophages end up producing the spike proteins. And that's how you get an immune response. Okay. Another concept that we need to know when we talk about the studies is vaccine efficacy versus vaccine effectiveness. Vaccine efficacy leads to a reduction in disease due to vaccination, okay? Versus effectiveness on the right column, it's reduction in clinical outcomes. So, pag sinabing vaccine efficacy, we're only dealing with data from phase 3 trials on sa controlled environment, no? So carried out under controlled conditions. So that's usually a phase 3 trial. So you can calculate the efficacy. When you start thinking about real world scenarios, sabihin natin 2-dose vaccine pero people don't actually get a second dose, for example. In the real world setting, you're talking about effectiveness. So there's a way to calculate efficacy, and I think this is important also for us to know. Vaccine efficacy is computed as this, people who get the disease in the unvaccinated minus the people who get the disease in the vaccinated, all over disease in vaccinated. So it's actually a ratio, no? And then we'll apply that later on when we talk about the studies. So SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, let's look at the evidence. The first one just a quick disclaimer. The PSMID has decided to include in our primer only those with published phase 3 data. Dr. Domingo said earlier that Sinovac already has phase 3 data that they have submitted to the FDA, but PSMID and the rest of us outside of the regulatory agencies don't have access to the exact phase 3 data. So we will not be able to make a good critical appraisal of the data. Once it's published, we will include it in our review of our list of vaccines that we review. But for now, we only have 3 on our list. The first one is Moderna, or mRNA-1273. So this is an mRNA vaccine. So sabi natin, mRNA, it's in a lipid coat. It's injected into the patient. The mRNA then is the protein is expressed within the cells. The macrophages will produce the spike proteins. There's no adjuvant. It's a 2-dose regimen, 100 micrograms, given 28 days apart intramuscularly. There are some special conditions for storage, negative 25 degrees Celsius, etc. And then this is the phase 3 data. They enrolled 30,420, 1:1 design. So 15,000 in the intervention group and 15,000 in the placebo group. You see here the study population. They enrolled patients 18 years old and above, resides in the USA. All 47% are females. There were some Asians. There also were some HIV patients. There were some patients who had already who were already positive for antibodies, meaning they previously got infected with COVID. So it's mRNA versus the vaccine versus placebo, and the vaccine efficacy is 94.1% with a confidence interval of 89.3 to 96.8. So because of the huge number of patients, the confidence interval is narrow, and the vaccine efficacy of 94.1% is very high in preventing symptomatic confirmed COVID-19. So preventing infection. Safety data, it is reactogenic. So you have pain and swelling in some patients. It also did get, or some patients also did get systemic effects like fever, headache, etc. There were some serious adverse events, intractable nausea, vomiting, facial swelling, etc. And for now, the contraindication listed is a severe allergic reaction, anaphylaxis, to any component of the Moderna vaccine or to a previous dose of Moderna. The second vaccine that I would like to talk about is the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine, VNT162b2. It's an mRNA vaccine, 2 doses then, 30 micrograms, given 21 days apart intramuscularly. Ito yung may special storage then a requirement of -70. After it's thawed, it can be stored in a refrigerator, 2 to 8 degrees for 5 days. And then once it's reconstituted, you have to use it within 6 hours. So there are some logistical considerations here. For the Pfizer vaccine, they enrolled 43,400 patients, 37,000 of which were analyzed, 18,000 almost equally in each group. No, and here they went as low as 16 years old, healthy with stable comorbid, so meron din yan HIV. There was also a small subset of the population that had COVID already. No? So placebo versus the vaccine, 95% efficacy, with a confidence interval na narrowed in 90.3 to 97.6. The important thing with the Pfizer vaccine, again, is the contraindications. No? Like Dr. Domingo said, initially, wala masyadong lumabas na allergies, no, anaphylaxis in the clinical trial, but when they started rolling it out as an EUA, they saw more patients with allergies. So now there's a contraindication for patients who have severe allergic reaction to a previous dose of the Pfizer vaccine. The third one with phase 3 data that's published and readily available for PSMID to review is the ChAdOx1 nCoV-19 or the AstraZeneca vaccine. This one is an adenovirus vector vaccine. So sabi natin, the adenovirus will receive or lalagay nila doon yung gene ng spike, no? And then it's injected into the patient. 2 doses, 6 to 12 weeks apart, intramuscular, no? Now for the phase 3 data, 7,500 versus 4,000, 2 sites, UK and Brazil, 7,500 and 4,000 each. They compared it with meningococcal vaccine or saline, and the vaccine efficacy rate is 70.4%. Medyo wide yung confidence interval because medyo lower yung number of people that they enrolled. No? 54.8 to 80.6% yung confidence interval niya. Safety data, nandyan yung adverse event data, no contraindications at this time. When we look deeper in the paper, no, there's vaccine. They reported vaccine efficacy, but they also reported vaccine efficacy for severe infections, meaning they were able to prevent severe infections as well. Ilan yung tao, no? So for the Moderna, 94% vaccine efficacy, but when it prevented 100% of people from getting severe infections. Pfizer, 66.4 lang ang severe infection prevention, yung vaccine efficacy for severe infection. And then the ChAdOx or Astra is 100% in preventing severe infections. And then you see here that all 3 vaccines will produce some amount of protection even after the first dose. No? So meron siyang efficacy even after the first dose. And then there are some other vaccines that we are waiting for. We do not have, like we said, we do not have a phase 3 for this yet. But as soon as we have a phase 3, we will include them in the analysis. Now, PSMID is already working with the Institute of Clinical Epi for the critical appraisal of all these papers. Now, so Sputnik or the from Gamaleya in Russia is an adenovirus vector vaccine, 2 doses then, intramuscular. The adenovirus that they used here, adenovirus 26 on day 0 and adenovirus 5 on day 21. So magkaiba. The phase 2 data shows that all patients given the vaccine produced the antibodies as expected. So 100% seroconversion rate. As you can see, hindi ito vaccine efficacy. Okay? This is a seroconversion rate because it's a phase 2 trial. The Sinovac vaccine or CoronaVac, it's an inactivated virus. So yung actual coronavirus in COVID, inactivate, nilagay sa vaccine, binigay sa pasyente. No? So 2 doses. In the phase 2 studies, they looked at 2 dosing regimens, 3 micrograms and 6 micrograms. Day 0 and day 14, these are the adverse events. The 6 microgram dose resulted in 98% seroconversion in day 0 and 100% seroconversion on day 14. And then there's Sinopharm, inactivated virus, then 2 doses. They looked at 2 dosing regimens, 14 and 21. These are the seroconversion rates. So pretty good rates then siya. So to summarize, I think I've gone over time a little bit. Vaccines are critical to achieve herd immunity and end this pandemic. And we really believe this. We need to vaccinate as many people as we can so that people are protected and, people stop getting COVID, people stop dying from COVID. However, when you look at the estimates, it suggests that we need to vaccinate as much as 2/3 of the population to achieve herd immunity. And remember, the assumption here is that dapat walang forward transmission. And none of the vaccines have shown that they prevent forward transmission yet. So we are not sure at this time if we can actually achieve herd immunity from the vaccines. And that is why the message here is we need, even if we get vaccinated, we need to continue practicing the minimum public health standards. All vaccines with published phase 3 data showed high degrees of efficacy and safety, as well as high rates of ability to prevent severe disease. And we've shown you this data. And then finally, a critical review of phase 3 clinical trial data is required for all vaccines in order to reliably evaluate both efficacy and safety. And that's my talk.
Thank you very much, Dr. KARL, for the informative and comprehensive discussion on vaccinology and on the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. So you have shown that the benefits of getting the vaccines, regardless of the brand, is much higher than the possible adverse effects. So let's now start answering questions from the chat box, but we'll limit it also due to time constraints. So first, can we have a soft copy of these presentations from our speakers?
No problem. We just need to watermark, but we'll send you a PDF version.
Yeah, I sent my PDF na din.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Eric and Dr. KARL. So, well, I can see that some of the questions in the chat box have been answered already by Dr. Eric as Dr. KARL was giving his lecture, but I'll just run through them to make sure that we have answered all queries. So for Dr. Eric, how about other drugs like monoclonal antibody and new antivirals? Same EUA process as vaccines?
Yes, if it's for COVID-19, they can also apply for an EUA, similar to the vaccine.
All right, thank you. So this was answered, but let's just read it again. Sir, what's the difference in terms of FDA approval with that of Dengvaxia?
Yeah, Dengvaxia actually had CPR, no? So that was registered and allowed marketing authorization. So kaya nga medyo nahirapan tayo ngayon kasi after that, ngayon nagre-require pa ng phase 4 completion before we vaccinate in government, no? So we had to revise that sa bayanihan law, plus yung EO pa for the EUA kasi EUA is midway through phase 3 pala.
Okay, and in relation to that, how do we address concerns with regards to the Dengvaxia incident in the context of the new COVID-19 vaccine?
Well, I think the complete difference is that, people who will get vaccinated now are going to be more informed. We're going to do a lot of communication, risk communication with the public before we even vaccinate. And of course, right before vaccination, you're going to be given all the information and informed consent, fully informed, consent will be taken before you're even given a vaccine.
Okay, thank you for that. This is a question from our medical director, Dr. Lilibet Maravilla, and I think some of the information were already mentioned by Dr. HENSON. So what among the vaccine trials have enrolled more Asians, 16 years old is the lowest age, but no cutoff age in elderly, provided they can be cleared.
Yeah, so in terms of the age muna, no, the Moderna trial let's see, the Pfizer trial enrolled 16 years old. And yun yung younger, no? And I think parang I read somewhere that they had, or parang they also expanded to 12 to 15, I think. Or eventually did. But remember, there's a data cutoff kasi. For Moderna, it's 18 years old. No? So, yun yung lowest. Pero wala silang upper limit doon sa in-enroll na age groups. What was the other question, Monica?
No, that's the question
That's
already.
it. Okay.
Answered. Yeah, thank you. So, maybe this can be answered by Dr. Domingo. Would the vaccine, Pfizer, be available to healthcare workers as free of charge?
Well, the vaccines will be available to everybody free of charge. No? Talagang the government is procuring for everybody. And it's very likely that the first batch of vaccines that will come in will be Pfizer, coming from the COVAX facility ng WHO. So yung likelihood that ang marireceive ng health workers natin would be Pfizer is very high.
Okay, thank you for that, sir. For Dr. HENSON, which subset of patients do you think will the vaccine have the least effect or a negative effect?
Difficult to say, but I think yung mga in the trials, no, they enrolled so pregnant women and kids wala sa trial, no? So definitely kailangan pa silang pag-aralan. So hindi pa sila technically kasama. But in the FAQs that I read, the pregnant women actually have a choice, no? If they are at high risk, for example, pwede. There's some question about the vaccine's efficacy on, say, the immunocompromised. And so those on cancer chemotherapy, those on steroids, etc. Someone actually private messaged me about patients with autoimmune diseases on, say, biologic, etc. So there's really not a lot of data to answer those questions. We need more studies about them. But in the end, it's a risk-benefit assessment. So if you are considered immunocompromised, but you work in the front lines, or you're at high risk for getting COVID, then you need to weigh the risk versus the benefit and then make a decision on whether to get it or not. None of the vaccines naman that's currently being evaluated are live virus. No, so there's no absolute contraindication for any of the immunocompromised to receive these vaccines.
Okay, thank you for that, sir. And again, the next question from Dr. Maravilla was already answered by Dr. Domingo. So no more reports of increasing incidence of Bell's palsy from the ongoing phase 3 trials. When can one get the vaccine after he had gotten COVID-19? Maybe Dr. KARL?
Yeah, so after you get COVID, the expectation is you have some antibodies. If you did not receive convalescent plasma, or if you were in the States and you got monoclonal antibodies, no, the dictum is you wait mga 90 days kasi the convalescent plasma can mess around with the immune reaction. But if you didn't get any of those, you can actually get the vaccine anytime after recovery from COVID. Pero you have some amount of protection kasi from the previous infection, so you have some time to wait. Pero for those na may special conditions, 90 days prescribed of waiting.
Okay, thank you, sir. Again, this is answered already. To Dr. Domingo, sir, will the Philippine FDA issue an EUA to a vaccine that has no published phase 3 clinical trial results, or it will all depend on the recommendation of the VEP? Dr. Domingo, Dr. Domingo.
We ask our experts to assess even if it's not yet published, no? Kasi sometimes it might take a few months before publication. But kasama meron tayong mga clinical epidemiologists sa ating panel so that they can take a look, and if there's anything that they feel needs to be clarified, we can always get the information from the proponent.
Okay, thank you, sir. So a question from Don Santos: can an individual safely get a different vaccine, like for example of a different vaccine type, after getting the first or second doses of one vaccine? For example, if the EUA is withdrawn for some reason in between doses, or if the patient develops an allergic reaction to the first dose, or perhaps if after the second dose, the first vaccine was proven to be less effective than initially thought and a better alternative is available.
Okay. Sige, I can answer that.
Yes.
Yung ano yan, two questions yan, no? The first scenario is you get one vaccine and then you're asking if you can get a different platform, different brand or different technology for the second dose. The answer to that is no. It's recommended that you complete the series. If you started, for example, with vaccine A, you should get the second dose of vaccine A. Kasi iba-iba ang yung sa cascade, iba-iba yung tinitrigger niya na reaction. No? So you get a more robust immune reaction if you stick to the same vaccine because it triggers the same. Remember, the first dose is a primer, the second dose is a booster. No? So paano mabuboost kung magkaiba sila ng sinestimulate? The second scenario is you complete 2 doses of one vaccine and then you want to get a second vaccine. There's actually no one stopping you from doing that. However, in a setting where vaccines are scarce and we want to vaccinate as many people as we can, the second one, at least from as far as our society is recommended, we strongly discourage people from getting a second vaccine pag nakatapos na sila ng isa. No? Because that will take away one vaccine from someone else who could have gotten vaccinated. At some point in the future, there will be millions of vaccines available, no? Kasi there won't be any shortage anymore. Then you can get vaccinated all you want.
Thank you, Sir KARL. So another question, if they included patients who already had COVID-19, because some trials included patients who recovered from COVID, how do we know that the immunity is from the vaccine or from the infection?
It's actually not very clear. In the phase 3 trials, what they did was, so they injected, say, 15,000 one arm, 15,000 another arm, and then let them go about their business, now, whether they got COVID or not. And then they counted the number of people who got COVID. Okay, so that's how they computed vaccine efficacy. I have not really seen any specific analysis of patients na specific to patients who already got COVID. No? Parang kasi very small yung numbers nila eh. So I don't think that we can make any good conclusions at this time on that specific subset of patients. However, we still recommend that patients get vaccinated even if they've already gotten COVID because of the phenomenon of reinfection. Okay, so because we don't know, there's still a lot that we don't know about about COVID. No, we want to keep people safe. So better na if you got COVID before, you still get vaccinated so that you decrease your chances of getting a reinfection.
Okay, thank you, Sir KARL. So our time is, we're actually over time already, but for the last question, and I think one of the pressing questions is that when do we expect the Pfizer to come in, and can a vaccine be procured or used even with pending EUA?
Yeah, well, first of all, no, they cannot use, nobody can use a vaccine without the EUA. You have to wait for it. Hindi pwedeng unahan. Second, when will it come in? Possibly as early as February. No, apparently the COVAX facility has some extra Pfizer vaccines available that might be coming in I think we're being inspected already. We're ready to accept them, and I think our cold chain preparations for the -70 degrees are ready. So there's a big possibility it might come in as early as next month.
Okay, thank you, sir. So, well, for the last question, and this is coming from me. So, in general, when you ask a healthcare worker if they will get the shot, the answer is most likely a yes. And as the first line in to receive the vaccines, how can you convince the healthcare workers to get the vaccine regardless of the brand? So, may have your thoughts both from Dr. Eric and Dr. KARL.
Sige, sir. Sige, okay, you want to go first?
No, you go first.
Sige, sir. I actually, Monica, I've been asking our nurses here in Medical City. I've been whenever I round, I've been, ambushing them.
Yeah.
And it's very alarming that out of the 20 or so nurses that I've ambushed with a question, if a vaccine was available today, will you get vaccinated? Out of the 20 or so, isa pa lang may outright yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, the reason why PSMID is doing this, giving lectures, etc., is because we want to increase vaccine awareness and vaccine acceptance. Because we know that there's a lot of mistrust given Dengvaxia, given the negative publicity about the vaccines. These vaccines are safe. They've been proven safe by good phase 3 data. But there are some nuances that we need to consider. So I think especially for healthcare workers, when we arm them with good information, then we get their confidence. A lot of these nurses who said they're not sure say na if given the right information, if we are reassured, then we will go for it. Parang out of the 20 or so, isa lang yung ayaw talaga niya kahit anong reassurance. Healthcare workers na yun. Can you imagine if we go to the community? No? So that's why we've been working a lot with the group of Beverly Ho in sa health promotions, no? Because we really think now we need to invest a lot of time to get people to be aware of the vaccines and to accept the vaccines so that they actually get vaccinated.
Thank you, sir. Sir Eric?
Yeah, well, I explain it this way. First of all, there's no one brand that will be able to supply 100 million Filipinos. So if we all want one brand, it will never happen. Hindi tayo mababakunahan lahat. That's why we're looking at 6 or 7 possible suppliers. The government is looking at everybody, possible. Para lang sigurado na makakuha tayo ng doses for everybody. Talagang kailangan paghatid. Hindi lang this year, next year probably tutuloy pa yung vaccination. Second, if it is given an EUA, it means our experts have really taken a look at it and that they meet minimum expectations. Now, meron naman tayong safety levels na acceptable and efficacy levels na acceptable. Magkakaroon din naman yan ng later on, I think, ng mas audience-specific vaccine. Baka for health workers, ito, sa mga low-risk areas naman, pwede ito, gano'n, no? So, the way that we're going to allocate them is going to be responsive also to assume, so that we can have maximum benefit from them. And siguro lang, ito lang yung kailangan din natin impress sa mga tao, not just health workers, but the population, vaccination is not just an individual strategy, it's a population-based health program. Kung hindi tayo, talaga namang may adverse events lahat ng bakuna, Pero kamukha nung nangyari sa Norway, dati 400 a month ang namamatay sa kanila, ngayon may 23 na namatay, pero nabawasan, So, there will always be people who will get some adverse events, who will get sick for a few days. But, in the end, when you weigh the benefit versus the risk, the whole population will benefit more if we get all vaccinated. And, sometimes you have to take one for the team. And this is exactly what we're asking everybody to do. We try to set as many safeguards as we can. We try to screen the vaccines before we even implement them, But, it's going to be an individual decision and you have to decide not only for yourself, but also for your community.
Okay, thank you very much. So again, in behalf of the Patient Safety Quality Management of the QualiMed Health Network, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to Dr. Eric Domingo and Dr. KARL HENSON for this very informative and productive morning. So to give her closing remarks, let me introduce briefly our last the one who will give the closing remarks. So we are privileged to have with us Dr. Maria Rosario Vergeire, who graduated Doctor of Medicine from De La Salle University College of Medicine. She took Masters in Public Health from the University of the Philippines, Manila. She is a faculty member of the Development Academy of the Philippines and a part-time faculty at the Ateneo School of Government. She is the former OIC, Deputy Director, General Filed Regulatory Operation of the Food and Drug Administration, and currently the OIC Undersecretary for the Health Regulation Team and the official spokesperson of the Department of Health. Everyone, let's welcome Dr. Rosario Vergeire.
To the QualiMed Health Network and to all participants of today's event. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for inviting the Department of Health to this program. I would also like to thank you for your efforts in augmenting the department's campaign in promoting vaccine confidence among the public, especially among our healthcare workforce. Before I continue, I'd like to recognize and greet the President and Chief Executive Officer of QualiMed Health Network, Dr. Edwin M. Mercado, panelists for these sessions, USEC Eric Domingo and Dr. Solante from the past president of PSMID. This public health emergency drove our national government to have an accelerated response in bolstering our healthcare system in terms of human resource, testing capacity, and health capacity. This is also true in the area of vaccine development. Contrary to what was normally done in the past, where vaccine development takes a relatively long period of time, this pandemic required that processes be expedited without compromising safety and effectiveness. The national government has authorized the Food and Drug Administration, headed by our speaker for today, Director General Undersecretary Rolando Eric Domingo, to issue emergency use authorization for vaccines, and FDA, through a risk-based approach, has streamlined the processes for EUA to just 21 working days. Because of the COVID-19 vaccine's novelty, vaccine hesitancy is unavoidable. Recognizing this issue, the task group on demand generation and communications of the vaccine cluster has started campaigns in order to increase vaccine trust and address vaccine hesitancy among Filipinos. Part of this campaign involves cascading pertinent information on vaccines through media fora and press releases, social media cards, and infographics. We have also conducted town hall meetings involving various experts in the field of immunization. Polls conducted in those town hall meetings show that there is improved vaccine confidence after lectures of experts were administered. Hence, there really is a benefit in doing information drives, especially when these are led by health experts and medical professionals. That is why we are appealing to you to help us strengthen this advocacy. Informed healthcare workers truly have a significant influence not just on patients, but to families, friends, workmates, and communities as well. The COVID-19 vaccine serves as an added protection to us Filipinos. With the stringent regulatory process of our experts and the Food and Drug Administration, we assure you that all vaccines that will be approved for use in the country are going to be safe and effective. Let us all help in conveying this message so that once vaccines are available in the Philippines, our fellow men will be able to make informed choices and decisions and have themselves immunized. As we wait for the vaccine rollout, we should continue practicing the minimum public health standards and be the solution, for these are already proven to be life-saving measures. As we continue our fight against COVID-19, Let us be part of this solution by dispelling misinformation and by helping our countrymen have a deeper understanding of the COVID-19 vaccines. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vergeire, for that. So at best, we had around 200 attendees. Again, thank you so much for attending, and we hope that we all get the vaccine in the hopes of ending the COVID-19 pandemic. So stay safe always, and always have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. See you
Thank
tomorrow.
you.
See you
Thank you po.
tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you.